Listen, you think you know what power looks like? Gold thrones and marble halls, war banners snapping in winter wind? That is not power. That is decoration. Real power is when an empire forgets you exist and you survive anyway. When they steal your name, your child, your entire goddamn life, and you still find a way to breathe. That is the story of a woman they called Shade, a queen buried alive inside her own kingdom. And tonight, you're going to watch her claw her way back from the grave they dug while she was still breathing. Stay until the end. You're going to need to see how this ends. And when you do, smash that like button and drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is paying attention. The kingdom of Vareth did not ask permission to exist. It simply stood there like a blade shoved into frozen earth, all black towers and iron certainty beneath skies that looked like old bruises. King Vaelor Thorn ruled it the way wolves ruled forests, through teeth and territory and the absolute refusal to bend. People feared him. They should have. He had carved Vareth from nothing. Border wars, blood feuds, political marriages that ended in assassination plots. He had survived all of it. Built an empire on the bones of men who thought power came from birthright instead of will. But empires do not collapse from outside threats first. They rot from the inside. And nobody noticed when the rot started wearing a servant's dress. Selene Vael moved through the palace like smoke, invisible, forgettable. Dressed in ash-gray linen that marked her as property of the crown, she scrubbed marble floors beneath chandeliers dripping with crystal wealth. Courtiers stepped over her hands without looking down. Guards talked through her like she was furniture. They called her Shade because naming something powerless made them feel safer. She never corrected them. She had no memory of anything before Vareth. No family, no past, just the palace and its endless corridors and the strange certainty that she was supposed to be somewhere else, doing something else, being someone else. Every empire creates ghosts. Selene was theirs. The palace kept 300 servants and Selene ranked among the lowest. Kitchen maids sneered at her. Stable boys ignored her. Even the laundry women, who smelled like lie and misery, treated her like contamination. She accepted it the way stones accept rain. What choice existed? At night she slept in a storage closet near the eastern wing. No windows, no heat, just stone walls and the smell of old leather and dust. She owned 2 dresses, 1 bowl, a comb with missing teeth. This was her kingdom. Then the screaming started. Prince Arion, the king's infant son, heir to the Vareth throne, born 6 months ago beneath celebrations that lasted a week. Wine flowed through the streets. Nobles showered the palace with gifts. Priests declared the child blessed by ancient bloodlines. And every single night since, the prince screamed. Not crying, not infant fussing, screaming, raw, desperate. The kind of sound that meant something was broken deep inside. Healers examined him, found nothing. Priests blessed him. Nothing changed. The queen, Lady Varella Sorn, held him with perfect maternal grace in public and called for wet nurses in private because the sound made her temples throb. Court physicians whispered about cursed blood. Weak constitutions. Noble generals quietly discussed succession plans in case the heir proved defective. King Vaelor said nothing, but everyone noticed how his jaw tightened when the screaming started, how his hands gripped the armrests of his throne until knuckles turned white. An empire could survive many things. A weak heir was not one of them. Selene heard the screaming too. Her closet sat 3 floors below the royal nursery, but sound traveled through stone like blood through veins. Every night around midnight, the palace filled with that terrible sound, and every night something inside Selene's chest tore open. Pain, physical pain, like invisible claws reaching into her ribs and squeezing until she could not breathe. She would curl against the wall, gasping, sweating, feeling an irrational certainty that she needed to reach that child. She never did. Servants did not enter royal chambers. That was law. Violating it meant execution. So Selene pressed her palms against cold stone and endured while the screaming continued, and her body betrayed her with agony that made no sense. Instinct is dangerous. It tells truth when logic demands obedience. 3 weeks into the prince's torment, Lady Varella Sorn summoned all senior servants to the throne room. She stood there in silver velvet and winter-white fur, looking like sovereignty itself. Perfect posture, perfect diction, perfect control. The daughter of House Sorn, the most powerful war family in Vareth. Generals? Strategists. Men who won battles through ruthless calculation. Varela inherited that gift. She surveyed the assembled servants with eyes like polished steel and spoke with the kind of voice that expected absolute compliance. Your incompetence is noted. The prince requires silence. Yet he screams. Therefore, someone in this palace is failing their duty. Find the solution, or I will find replacements. The head housekeeper, a rail-thin woman named Constance, bowed so low her forehead nearly touched marble. My lady, every healer in Vareth has examined His Highness. Every treatment attempted. The physicians believe... I do not care what physicians believe. I care about results. Make the child stop screaming, or I will start removing servants one finger at a time until motivation improves. Silence filled the throne room like water filling lungs. Varela smiled, dismissed. They scattered. Selene remained motionless in the back row, hidden among 24 terrified women. But for just a moment, Lady Varela's gaze swept across the crowd and landed on her. Recognition flickered. Not familiarity, something colder. The look predators give prey before deciding whether to bite. Then Varela turned away and Selene exhaled breath she had not realized she was holding. Power at the summit does not fear enemies first, it fears uncertainty. That night the screaming started earlier, 10 o'clock, then 9. The prince wailed with escalating desperation while healers rushed through corridors and the queen's voice echoed through stone. Nothing works! Try something else! Selene lay in her closet, hands pressed against her chest, feeling the now familiar agony rip through her ribs. Worse tonight, sharper, like something inside was trying to claw its way out. She lasted 30 minutes before instinct overrode survival. She stood, opened the door, started walking. The eastern wing glowed with torchlight and panic. Servants rushed past carrying herbs, warm milk, blessed oils. Guards stood outside the nursery looking grim. Inside, multiple voices layered over the prince's screaming. Selene should have stopped, should have turned around, should have remembered what happened to servants who broke sacred law. Instead, she walked straight through the nursery doors. The room froze. Lady Varela stood beside an ornate cradle, perfectly composed despite chaos. 2 healers hovered nearby. A priest muttered prayers. 4 guards flanked the walls. And in the cradle, wrapped in silk and screaming like his soul was tearing apart, lay Prince Arion. Selene crossed the room. Constance shrieked, "What are you doing? Get out!" One guard moved to intercept. Selene did not stop, did not slow, just walked straight to the cradle, reached down, and lifted the prince into her arms. The entire palace stopped breathing. Prince Arion fell silent, not gradually, instantly. The child's tiny body relaxed against her chest, his fists unclenched, his breathing steadied. For the first time in 6 months, peace replaced torment. Selene looked down at his face and felt the universe shift. She knew this child, not from memory, from something deeper. Recognition that existed beneath thought, beneath name, beneath everything language could explain. This was her son. Lady Varela's voice cut through shock like a blade through silk. Remove her, immediately. Guards grabbed Selene's arms. She did not resist, did not fight, just held the sleeping prince while they dragged her backward, and Constance pried the child from her grip. The moment Arion left her arms, he started screaming again. Varela's perfect composure cracked. Enough! Take that creature to the lower cells. I will deal with this personally. They hauled Selene out of the nursery down 3 flights of stairs, through corridors she had scrubbed 1,000 times, down further, into the palace catacombs where stone turned damp and torchlight barely reached. The cells smelled like iron and old fear. They threw her inside, locked the door, left her in darkness. Selene pressed her back against cold stone and closed her eyes. The pain in her chest was gone. For the first time in 6 months, she felt nothing. No, not nothing. Certainty. That child was hers, which meant everything she remembered about her life was wrong. In kingdoms built on dominance, instinct often discovers truth before politics dares acknowledge it. Morning arrived without light. The catacombs existed beyond sunrise. beyond time, just stone and shadow and the distant sound of water dripping somewhere deeper. Selene did not sleep. She sat against the wall, replaying the previous night, trying to force memory through fog that had no shape. She knew the palace, knew its routines, knew how to avoid attention. But before that? Nothing. Like her life started the moment she woke up in that storage closet 3 years ago with a splitting headache and no idea who she was. The palace physician claimed she had been found collapsed in the lower town. Fever, delirium, some illness that burned memory clean. The king showed mercy, gave her work, a place. She accepted because survival required acceptance. Now that story felt like sand running through fingers. Footsteps echoed down stone corridors, keys rattled. The cell door opened and torchlight spilled across damp stone. 2 guards entered, followed by an elderly man in royal physician robes. He carried a leather case and wore the expression of someone who had seen every possible human condition and found none of them surprising. His name was Osric. He had examined Selene once, years ago, when she first arrived, declared her fit for service and promptly forgot she existed. Now he studied her with clinical interest. The Queen demands blood rights and truth examinations. You will submit or you will die. Those are the options. Selene met his gaze without flinching. What am I accused of? Osric set his case down and began removing instruments. Glass vials, silver needles, a bowl carved from black stone. Manipulation, forbidden magic, attempting to gain influence over the royal heir through unnatural means. Lady Varela believes you are a threat to the throne. Am I? That is what the rites will determine. He worked efficiently, drew blood, mixed it with substances that smelled like burnt copper and winter frost. Spoke incantations in a language Selene did not recognize. Sacred ceremonies designed to measure lineage, loyalty, and soul. Every test failed. Her blood showed no magical signature, no noble ancestry, no connection to any known bloodline in Vareth's records. Osric documented everything with meticulous precision and absolutely no emotion. The results are clear. You possess no supernatural ability, no claim to royal blood, no justification for what occurred last night. Then why did the prince stop crying? Osric paused. For the first time, something flickered behind his clinical mask. I do not know. He packed his instruments, called for the guards, and left without looking back. Selene remained alone in the cell while above her, the palace exploded into accusation. She could not hear the debates, but she could imagine them. Lady Varela would call for execution, spectacle, a public display of what happened to servants who forgot their place. The nobles would agree. Court functioned on hierarchy. Disruption demanded correction. King Vaelor would say nothing, because that was how emperors survived, by letting others make messy decisions until the right path became obvious. Dominance was never about affection. It was ownership. 2 days passed in darkness. They fed her once, stale bread, water that tasted like rust. On the 3rd day, the cell door opened and Lady Varela stepped inside. She came alone. No guards, no witnesses, just the queen in her silver perfection and Selene in her ash-gray rags. Varela studied her the way scholars studied insects pinned beneath glass. Then she smiled. Do you know what I find fascinating? You possess no memory of your life before Vareth. No family, no past. You simply appeared 3 years ago, damaged and convenient. The king showed mercy because he is occasionally sentimental about broken things. Selene said nothing. Varela continued, mercy creates problems. Because broken things do not stay broken forever. Sometimes they remember, sometimes they fight back, and sometimes they threaten everything carefully built while they were sleeping. What are you saying? Varela crouched down until they were eye level. Her perfume smelled like winter roses and calculated cruelty. I am saying you are not a servant, Shade. You are something far more dangerous. And the worst part? You do not even know it yet. She stood. The king and I were never married. Selene's breath caught. There was no royal wedding, no grand ceremony, no union blessed by priests and witnesses. All of it was fabricated. Memory craft. Forbidden magic woven through the entire kingdom until everyone remembered a history that never happened. Why? Because 3 years ago, Vaelor Thorn returned from a border alliance with a wife nobody expected. A woman with no political value, No strategic advantage, just some bond he claimed was sacred, unbreakable. The kind of irrational attachment that destroys empires. House Sorn did not build power through generations of war and sacrifice just to watch it slip away because a king fell in love with the wrong woman. So we fixed it. We erased you, replaced you with me. Wove a new history where I was always queen and you were never anything at all. The catacombs felt suddenly smaller, airless. Virella watched realization break across Selene's face like dawn across shattered glass. The prince is your son. Vaelor is your mate. This kingdom is yours. Or it was, before we buried you inside your own life and convinced everyone, including you, that you never existed. Why are you telling me this? Because in 3 days you will face trial. The court will demand justice for your crime of touching the royal heir, and you will be executed in front of the entire kingdom. I want you to die knowing exactly what you lost. Virella turned toward the door, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. The prince cries because his bond with you was never fully severed. A mother's connection, even one buried beneath layers of false memory, does not break easily. That is why he screams. That is why only you can soothe him. Biology is inconvenient that way. She left. The cell door slammed. Selene sat in darkness, trembling. Not from fear, from rage, from the kind of rage that came from discovering you had been buried alive by people who smiled while shoveling dirt onto your face. She pressed her palms against stone and felt something ancient stir beneath skin and bone. Memory did not return. Not yet. But certainty did. She was not a servant. She was a queen, mother of the heir, mate to a king who no longer remembered her face, and in 3 days they were going to kill her for daring to touch her own child. Virella believed the throne justified betrayal. She was about to learn a different truth. Some women burn kingdoms before surrendering what belongs to them. 2 floors above the catacombs, King Vaelor Thorn stood in his private chambers staring at nothing. He was 43, built like war. Scars layered over muscle earned through decades of survival. Dark hair streaked with silver, eyes like winter storms. Men feared him. They should. He had killed his first enemy at 15, built Vareth through blood and strategy and absolute refusal to accept defeat. Now he felt something he had not experienced in years. Doubt. The servant girl haunted him. Not her face specifically, not her name, just the irrational certainty that when she held his son, something fundamental had shifted in the universe. He trusted instinct. Instinct kept men alive when logic failed, and instinct screamed that Virella's explanation felt wrong. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. Osric stepped inside, carrying his leather case and the expression of a man who had discovered something he wished he had not. Your Majesty, the blood rites are complete. And? The servant possesses no magical ability, no noble bloodline, no justification for her effect on the prince. By every measurable standard, she should not exist as anything more than what she appears to be. Vaelor waited. Osric set his case down. However, I found something else. 3 years ago, during your border campaign, palace records show a disruption in the royal archives. Entire sections were rewritten, dates changed, witnesses replaced. At the time, we attributed it to standard administrative correction. But now? Now I believe someone rewrote history. Vaelor's hand drifted toward the dagger at his belt. Old habit, violence rising when certainty crumbled. Speak plainly. Osric met his gaze with the courage of a man too old to fear death. I believe Lady Virella is not your wife. I believe someone used forbidden memory craft to make you forget your true queen. And I believe that servant in your dungeons is the woman you actually married. Silence filled the chamber like snow filling a grave. Vaelor's voice came out quiet, dangerous. If what you say is true, then my entire reign rests on a lie. Yes, Your Majesty. If what you say is true, then House Sorn committed treason on a scale that should result in their complete annihilation. Yes, Your Majesty. And if what you say is true, then I have been sleeping beside a traitor for 3 years while my actual wife scrubbed floors beneath my feet. Osric said nothing, because what answer could possibly suffice? Vaelor walked to the window. Outside, Vareth sprawled beneath winter sky. His kingdom, his empire, built on conquest and certainty. Now that certainty felt like sand. Find the truth. I do not care what methods you use or who you have to break. Find out what happened 3 years ago. And if House Sorn did this, if they dared to manipulate my mind and steal my mate, then I will personally feed every member of their bloodline to the wolves." He turned back. "And bring me the servant. I want to look her in the eyes and see what instinct tells me." Osric bowed and left. Vaelor remained at the window, hands gripping the stone sill until his knuckles turned white. 3 years. 3 years sleeping beside a lie, while his actual queen lived as a ghost in his own palace. If Varela had done this, if House Sorn had committed this level of betrayal, then the entire kingdom was about to drown in blood. Because crowns survive scandal. They rarely survive visible contradiction. And Vaelor Thorn did not forgive. He buried. Deep in the catacombs, Selene felt something crack open inside her chest. Not memory. Power. The walls of the cell suddenly felt thinner, the darkness less oppressive. Her body hummed with energy that had no name. She stood, pressed her palm against the iron door, and felt metal grow warm beneath her touch. Somewhere in the bloodline, buried beneath false history, something ancient stirred. Something that remembered when queens did not beg for crowns. They took them. The trial was set for dawn, 3 days away. But dawn, Selene realized, was not the deadline that mattered. The deadline was how long it took for a buried queen to remember she had teeth, and that everyone who put her in the ground was about to find out what happened when predators woke up angry. The cell door opened at midnight, not Varela this time. King Vaelor Thorn stepped into the catacombs alone, carrying a single torch that cast his shadow across damp stone like a stain. He wore no crown, no ceremonial armor, just leather and steel and the kind of presence that made air feel heavier. Selene did not stand, did not bow. She remained sitting against the wall, watching him with eyes that no longer held fear. Something had shifted during the hours since Varela's confession. The fog in her mind had not lifted completely, but certainty had replaced confusion. This man was hers, and she was done pretending otherwise. Vaelor studied her in silence. Minutes passed. The torch crackled. Water dripped somewhere deeper in the catacombs. Finally he spoke. "Osric believes you are my wife." Selene held his gaze. "What do you believe?" His jaw tightened. That single flex of muscle betrayed volumes. Kings did not show uncertainty, could not afford doubt. Yet here stood a man whose entire reign might rest on fabricated memory. "I believe something is wrong. I have felt it for 3 years. Like waking from dreams I cannot remember and finding pieces missing. Conversations that never happened, moments that feel false." He stepped closer. "When you held my son, something inside me recognized it as correct. Not logical, not explainable, just correct." "That is called instinct," Selene said quietly. "The thing men ignore when politics demands obedience." Vaelor crouched down until they were eye level. This close she could see scars layering his face. Blade cuts, burn marks. A life measured in violence survived. If what Osric suspects is true, if Varela and House Sorn used forbidden magic to erase you and replace my memories, then I have been sleeping beside a traitor while my actual mate lived as a ghost in my own palace. His voice dropped lower. Dangerous. That would make me the greatest fool in Vareth's history, or the greatest victim. Kings are not victims. Everyone is a victim when memory itself becomes a weapon. Silence filled the space between them like pressure before storms break. Vaelor reached out slowly, gave her time to pull away. When she did not, he touched her face with calloused fingers that had held swords longer than they had held anything gentle. The moment his skin met hers, something cracked. Not in the cell. In him. Memory slammed through his mind like an avalanche. Fragments. Pieces. Not complete, but enough. A border negotiation 3 years ago. Firelight and winter. A woman with eyes that saw through his armor. A bond forming faster than logic could prevent. A wedding performed beneath stars with only wolves as witnesses. Her voice saying his name like it meant safety instead of fear. Then nothing. Blackness where memory should exist. And waking up 6 months later with Varela beside him, and everyone insisting she had always been there. Vaelor pulled his hand back like he had touched burning metal. His breathing came harder, faster. What did they do to me? Selene watched him unravel with something between pity and rage. They buried me inside your mind, took your mate, replaced her with a politically convenient lie, and then they made everyone, including you, forget I ever existed. Why? Because House Sorn did not build their empire by letting kings make stupid decisions about love. Dominance requires control. You fell in love with the wrong woman, so they fixed it. Vaelor stood abruptly, turned away. His hand went to the dagger at his belt, and she watched his knuckles turn white around the handle. When he spoke again, his voice carried the kind of cold that preceded executions. If this is true, if they manipulated me, stole my mate, buried my memories, then House Sorn just declared war on the crown, and I will burn their entire bloodline down to ash. He turned back. But first I need proof. Memory is not enough. Courts require evidence. Without it, this becomes my word against the most powerful war family in Vareth. Civil war. The kingdom tears itself apart. Selene stood slowly. Her body ached from days in the cell, but something else burned hotter than pain. Power. She could feel it now, coiled beneath skin and bone, waiting. Not magic exactly. Something older. Something that had been suppressed for 3 years and was finally waking up angry. Then give me 3 days. Let me face Virella's trial. Let her try to kill me in front of the entire court, and when she fails, everyone will see what House Sorn tried to bury. Vaelor studied her with the intensity of a predator recognizing another predator. You sound certain you will survive. I am certain I am done dying quietly. He almost smiled. Not quite, but something flickered behind those winter storm eyes that might have been respect. 3 days then. But understand this. If you fail, if Virella executes you in that arena, I cannot intervene. Not without proof. Not without breaking the laws I built this kingdom on. I do not need you to save me. I need you to remember who I am. Vaelor moved toward the door, then paused. Your name. Your real name. Before they made you shade. Selene. He repeated it quietly, testing how it felt in his mouth. Then he left without looking back. The cell door closed, but did not lock. Selene stood in torchlight and felt something ancient unfurl inside her chest. 3 days until trial. 3 days until the entire kingdom watched her face the woman who had stolen her life. 3 days to remember who she was beneath the lies. Enough time for a buried queen to grow teeth, or enough time to die trying. Either way, silence was over. The palace erupted into chaos by morning. Word spread faster than fire through dead grass. The king had visited the prisoner, spoken with her alone, left her cell unlocked. Court nobles gathered in clusters, whispering theories behind jeweled hands. Was Vaelor going mad? Had the servant girl actually bewitched him? Was this some political maneuver no one understood yet? Lady Virella moved through the speculation like a blade through silk. Perfect composure, perfect grace. She wore white today instead of silver. Mourning colors, a calculated choice that positioned her as the wronged party before the trial even began. She found Vaelor in the war room studying maps of territories that meant nothing at the moment. He did not look up when she entered. You visited her. Not a question. An accusation wrapped in silk. I did. Why? Because I wanted to look her in the eyes and see what instinct told me. And what did instinct say? Vaelor finally raised his gaze. When he looked at Virella now, something had shifted. The warmth that had existed before, manufactured or not, had disappeared. Instinct said I should have listened to it 3 years ago. Virella's perfect mask slipped for just a moment. Fear flickered behind her eyes before training reasserted control. You are letting sentiment cloud judgment. The trial will prove her guilt. She touched the royal heir without permission. That crime demands execution regardless of whatever manipulation she has woven around your mind. Perhaps. Or perhaps this trial will prove something else entirely. Virella stepped closer, lowered her voice to the intimate register she had perfected over 3 years of false marriage. Vaelor, I have stood beside you through war and politics and every threat to this throne. I have given you counsel, stability, an heir. Do not throw that away because some servant girl made your son stop crying. Did you? What? Give me an heir. The question hung in the air like a blade suspended above both their throats. Virella's composure cracked completely. How dare you question? Answer me. Did you give birth to Prince Arion, or is that another lie sewn into false memory? Silence. Then Varela laughed. Not the practiced court laugh. Something colder, more honest. You are already lost, she said quietly. She has poisoned you against your own wife, against your own family. House Sorn will not tolerate this insult. House Sorn should be very careful about what they say next. Vaelor closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He did not touch her, did not need to. Proximity alone carried threat. If I discover you have lied to me, if I find evidence that you and your family manipulated my mind and stole my mate, then I will not execute you quickly. I will make sure your death takes days, and I will make House Sorn watch. Varela met his gaze with the courage of someone who had already calculated her odds and decided to push forward anyway. You have no proof, just the word of a nobody servant against the most powerful family in Vareth. Even if you believe her, the court never will. And without the court, you have no kingdom. She turned toward the door, then paused. The trial happens in 3 days. Make peace with reality before then, because after she dies, we will never speak of this again. She left. Vaelor stood alone in the war room, surrounded by maps of conquered territories, and understood the trap. Varela was right. Without proof, this became political suicide. Even if he believed Selene, even if instinct screamed truth, he could not move against House Sorn without evidence the court would accept. And if Selene died in the trial, truth died with her. He had built an empire on ruthless calculation. Now calculation had become his cage. Power at the summit has a cost. The higher you climb, the fewer choices remain available, and the lonelier truth becomes. Selene spent the next 2 days alone in her unlocked cell. They brought food, water, even clean clothes. Small mercies that felt like insults after years of invisibility. She did not eat much. Hunger had been replaced by something sharper, focus. At night she felt power rising inside her like water behind a cracking dam. Not magic, something else. Something that lived in blood and bone and the deep places where memory could not be erased. She pressed her palms against stone walls and felt warmth spread through rock. Felt the cell recognize her as something other than prisoner. Fragments of memory returned in pieces. A forest border, firelight. Vaelor's face younger, less scarred, looking at her like she was the only real thing in a world built on lies. His voice. You feel it too, the bond. Her answer. I feel everything. Their wedding beneath winter stars. No priests, no witnesses except wolves howling in distant hills. Just 2 people choosing each other against every rational calculation. His hands gentle despite decades of violence. Her certainty that she had finally found home. Then blackness. Waking in a storage closet with no past and a splitting headache and the absolute conviction that something vital had been stolen. The memories felt real but distant, like watching someone else's life through frosted glass. But the rage felt immediate. 3 years. 3 years scrubbing floors in her own palace while another woman slept beside her mate and raised her son. 3 years being called shade by people who had forgotten she was ever a queen. Varela thought burying someone alive was the same as killing them. She was about to learn the difference. On the morning of the 3rd day, guards came for Selene. Not rough, not gentle, just efficient. They escorted her up from the catacombs, through corridors she knew by heart, out into winter sunlight that hurt her eyes after days underground. The arena stood in the palace courtyard, ancient stone, built centuries ago for trials by combat. Blood had soaked this ground so many times the earth stayed dark even in drought. Thousands gathered to watch. Nobles in their finest, commoners granted special access, guards lining the walls. This was spectacle as much as justice. The kind of public display that reminded everyone what happened when hierarchy was challenged. Selene stood at the arena's edge in borrowed leather armor that did not fit right and a sword she barely knew how to hold. Across the sand, Lady Varela entered wearing custom battle gear that cost more than most houses. Silver and white. Ceremonial but functional. The armor of someone who had trained for this exact scenario. She looked like sovereignty itself. Selene looked like prey. The crowd murmured accordingly. King Vaelor sat in the royal box, expressionless. Prince Arion was not present, too young for blood sport. A mercy Selene appreciated even as part of her ache to see her son one more time before potential death. The High Judge, an ancient man named Corvin, who had presided over trials for 40 years, raised his staff. Lady Virella Sorn, you accuse this woman of forbidden magic and manipulation of the royal heir. I do. Selene Vael, you deny these charges. Selene met Corvin's gaze and felt something shift inside her. Not Vael. Her voice carried across the arena stronger than it should have. My name is not Vael. It never was. I am Selene of the Solaren line, wife to King Vaelor Thorn, mother of Prince Arion, and rightful queen of this kingdom that buried me alive while I was still breathing. The crowd erupted. Shock, outrage, disbelief. Virella laughed, loud enough for everyone to hear. The deluded peasant claims royal blood. How entertaining. Shall we test this fantasy with steel? Corvin slammed his staff down 3 times. Silence returned gradually. The combat will determine truth. Victory proves the gods favor your claim. Defeat proves guilt. These are the old laws. They stand regardless of modern doubt. He stepped back. Begin. Virella moved first. Fast, trained. She crossed the sand in seconds and struck with precision born from expensive education and countless sparring sessions. Selene barely blocked. Metal screamed against metal. The impact sent shockwaves up her arms. She stumbled backward, already off balance. The crowd jeered. Virella pressed the advantage, strike after strike. Each one calculated to wound but not kill immediately. This was theater as much as murder. She needed the execution to look justified. Selene blocked, dodged, survived by pure instinct because technique had never been taught to servants. Blood painted the sand. Hers. Virella's blade had caught her shoulder. Not deep, but enough to slow her further. The crowd's noise grew louder. Bloodlust rising. Finish her. End this farce. Virella circled slowly, savoring the moment. Any last words before you die forgotten? Selene pressed her hand against the bleeding shoulder. Felt warmth spreading. Not just blood. Power. She met Virella's gaze and smiled. Not forgotten. Just buried. There is a difference. Then something inside her exploded. Light. Silver radiance that erupted from her skin like dawn breaking through storm clouds. The arena flooded with luminescence that made nobles shield their eyes and guards step backward. Selene's body convulsed. Bones cracked. Reformed. Skin rippled. She collapsed forward onto hands that were no longer hands. Transformation took seconds. When the light faded, Selene no longer stood in the arena. A wolf did. Massive. White as winter itself. Eyes still human, but body ancient and terrifying. The entire crowd fell silent. Then someone screamed. White Sovereign. The word spread like plague. White Sovereign. Solaren bloodline. The extinct imperial line. Virella stumbled backward. Perfect composure shattered completely. No. That line was destroyed. Every last member executed centuries ago. You cannot be... The wolf growled. The sound carried weight beyond volume. Primal authority that bypassed thought and struck directly into instinct. Every person in the arena felt the pressure. Nobles, guards, even Vaelor. The need to submit crashed through their minds like a wave. Not magical compulsion, something deeper. Recognition that something higher in the food chain had just revealed itself. Across the arena, King Vaelor gripped the armrests of his throne hard enough to crack wood. Memory flooded back completely. All of it. Their meeting, their bond, their marriage. The night Virella and her father had ambushed them with a mage who specialized in memory craft. The pain of having his mate ripped from his mind while she screamed. Waking months later with false memories and everyone insisting Virella had always been his queen. 3 years of living a lie while his actual mate suffered invisibly beneath his feet. He stood. The movement caught everyone's attention. When he spoke, his voice carried the absolute authority of a man who had just remembered exactly who he was. Selene Solaren Thorn, Queen of Vareth, my bonded mate, mother of my heir. The crowd erupted again. Shock layered over chaos. Vaelor descended from the royal box, crossed the arena, walked straight through the space where battle had been happening moments before. He stopped before the white wolf, knelt in blood-soaked sand, and bowed his head. Every instinct in the arena recognized what that gesture meant. Not surrender, acknowledgement. The white sovereign had returned, and kingdoms would burn before she was buried again. Vaelora's perfect mask shattered completely. She screamed, incoherent rage, then grabbed her sword with both hands and charged the wolf with the desperate fury of someone who had lost everything and refused to accept it. The wolf moved. One moment, Vaelor was attacking. The next, she was pinned beneath massive jaws that could crush her skull, but chose pressure instead of death. The entire arena held its breath. Selene in wolf form held Vaelora's throat between her teeth. One flex of jaw muscles would end this. End her. End the woman who had stolen 3 years and buried a queen alive. But Selene did not bite down. Slowly, she opened her jaws, released Vaelor, stepped back. Transformation reversed. Light flared again. Bone and flesh reformed. Selene stood human once more. Naked, bleeding, exhausted, but standing. She looked down at Vaelor crumpled in the sand and spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had nothing left to prove. I could kill you, should kill you, but revenge is not the same as justice. She turned toward the crowd. Lady Vaelor Sorn and House Sorn used forbidden memory craft to erase me from history. They manipulated your king, stole the rightful queen, replaced truth with lies woven so deep that an entire kingdom forgot I existed. She gestured toward Vaelor, who still knelt in the sand. Your king did not betray you. He was betrayed. His mind was violated. His mate was stolen. His son was raised by the woman who orchestrated it all. Silence. Then from the crowd, someone shouted, "Prove it!" Others joined. How do we know you speak truth? Memory can be false. Selene looked at Vaelor. He met her gaze and something passed between them that needed no words. He stood, walked to Vaelor, grabbed her by the hair and hauled her upright. His voice carried across the arena like judgment itself. Confess. Tell them what you did. Or I will hand you to my mate and let her finish what she started. Vaelor met his eyes and saw no mercy there. No love. No false bond woven through manufactured memory. Just the cold rage of a man who had been violated in ways most people could not comprehend. She started laughing. Not hysteria, calculation. You think confession matters? You think truth changes anything? House Sorn controls half your military. We have alliances across every major territory. If you move against us, this kingdom tears itself apart. She pulled free from his grip, stood tall despite defeat. Kill me if you want. Execute me in front of your people. It changes nothing, because power is not about who deserves the throne. It is about who can hold it. Her smile turned vicious. And you just proved you cannot hold it without tearing Vareth apart. She was right. Everyone knew it. Moving against House Sorn meant civil war. Thousands dead. The empire fractured. All because a king had been stupid enough to fall in love with the wrong woman 3 years ago. Vaelor looked at Selene, then at the crowd, then at Vaelor. He made his choice. Guards. Arrest Lady Vaelor Sorn. Charge her with high treason. Memory manipulation. Conspiracy against the crown. He turned to address the crowd directly. Send word to Lord Severin Sorn. Tell him his daughter has confessed to crimes against the kingdom. Tell him he has 1 day to surrender House Sorn's military assets and submit to royal judgment. He paused. And tell him if he refuses, I will personally hunt down every member of his bloodline and feed them to the wolves. The crowd erupted. Some cheered. Others protested. Violence hung in the air like the moment before lightning strikes. Vaelor laughed harder. You just declared war on the most powerful family in Vareth. Congratulations. Your kingdom will burn because you could not let go of a woman you barely remember. Vaelor stepped close enough that only Vaelor could hear his next words. My kingdom will burn regardless. At least this way I burn it for truth instead of living in lies. He turned to the guards. Take her to the deepest cell. No visitors, no communication. She speaks to no one until Judgment Day. They dragged Vaelor away still laughing. The arena slowly emptied, nobles rushing to their estates, commoners whispering prophecies, guards preparing for war. Selene stood alone in blood-soaked sand, wrapped in someone's cloak, watching her kingdom fracture around the truth she had just revealed. Vaelor approached slowly. When he reached her, he did not touch her, did not embrace her, just stood close enough that she could feel his presence. I remember everything now. All of it. What we had. What they took. What I should have protected. Selene looked up at him. And I am sorry does not cover what was stolen from us, but it is all I have right now. She studied his face. The scars, the exhaustion, the rage barely contained beneath kingly composure. Then she spoke the truth they both understood. Sorry does not rebuild kingdoms. Neither does revenge. We have 3 days before House Sorn mobilizes their forces. 3 days to prepare for civil war. 3 days before this empire tears itself apart. She stepped closer. So stop apologizing and start remembering how to fight beside your mate instead of against her. Something flickered in Vaelor's eyes. Recognition. Not just of who she was, of who they could be if they survived what came next. He extended his hand. She took it. And in the empty arena, surrounded by blood and shattered lies, a king and queen who had been buried alive began to plan how to burn down everyone who had put them in the ground. 3 days until House Sorn struck back. 3 days until civil war fractured Vareth. 3 days until a white sovereign reminded the kingdom why her bloodline had been hunted to extinction. Not because they were weak, but because they were the only thing powerful enough to reshape how empires defined power itself. The point of no return had arrived, and there would be no mercy for anyone who stood between a mother and her child, or a queen and her stolen crown. War arrived quietly, not with trumpets or declarations, just the absence of sound that comes before violence reshapes landscapes. 3 days had passed since the arena. 3 days since Selene revealed herself as white sovereign, and the kingdom watched its foundation crack open like ice under pressure. 3 days of nobles choosing sides while commoners whispered prophecies and soldiers sharpened blades they would soon use against their own brothers. Civil war did not announce itself with ceremony. It arrived when men stopped talking and started calculating who would survive the choosing. Inside the war room, King Vaelor stood over maps marked with troop movements and supply routes. Red markers indicated House Sorn forces. Blue showed loyalists. The red outnumbered blue 3-1. Beside him stood Selene, dressed now in leather armor that actually fit, a sword at her hip, hair pulled back tight. She looked nothing like the servant who had scrubbed floors 3 weeks ago. She looked like what she was, a queen preparing for war. General Thaddeus, Vaelor's most trusted military commander, pointed at the eastern territories with a gnarled finger. Lord Severin has not responded to your ultimatum. Instead, he is mobilizing. 5,000 soldiers marching toward the capital, another 3,000 securing supply routes. They will arrive in 4 days, maybe 3 if they force march. Vaelor studied the map with the cold focus of a man who had won wars through calculation instead of courage alone. Our numbers? Thaddeus grimaced. 1,800 loyal troops inside the capital, another 1,000 scattered across western territories. We can recall them, but it takes time we do not have, so we are outnumbered 3-1 defending our own capital. Yes, Your Majesty. Silence filled the war room like water filling lungs. Selene spoke quietly. The white sovereign ability. Can we use it to turn their soldiers? Every head turned toward her. Osric, the old physician who had discovered the truth about memorycraft, cleared his throat carefully. In theory, Your Majesty. The Solaran bloodline possesses authority that bypasses normal allegiance. Soldiers who see you in wolf form feel compelled to submit, not through magic, through primal recognition that something higher exists in the hierarchy. In theory, Selene repeated. But your transformation is new, untrained. The historical records suggest white sovereigns required years to master full authority projection, and attempting to influence thousands of soldiers simultaneously could kill you. Osric's gaze was steady. The power that makes you a white sovereign also burns through human bodies faster than they can sustain. Push too hard and you do not just fail, you die, messily. Vaelor's hand clenched into a fist on the table. So we have 4 days before 8,000 enemy soldiers arrive to slaughter everyone loyal to the crown. We are outnumbered, undersupplied, and our only advantage might kill my mate if we try to use it. He looked around the room. Does anyone have a strategy that does not end with Vareth drowning in its own blood? No one answered. Because sometimes survival has no good options, just choices about how badly you are willing to lose. General Thaddeus broke the silence. There is one possibility. We could negotiate, offer House Sorn terms, shared power, a compromise that prevents total war. Vaelor's laugh came out sharp, bitter. You mean surrender? Dress it up however you want, but that is what you are suggesting. We hand power back to the family that manipulated my mind and buried my mate alive. In exchange, they promised not to kill us immediately. Thaddeus met his gaze without flinching. I'm suggesting we survive. Your Majesty, I have served you for 20 years, followed you through campaigns that should have killed us all. But this is different. We cannot win a straight fight, and dying for pride accomplishes nothing except making our enemy's victory easier. He gestured toward Selene. Your queen suffered 3 years of humiliation and survived. Perhaps survival now requires swallowing more humiliation until we are strong enough to strike back. The room held its breath. Vaelor looked at Selene. She held his gaze and spoke with the quiet certainty of someone who had learned exactly what she was willing to sacrifice. I spent 3 years as a ghost because I had no choice. Now I have one. And I will not teach my son that survival requires bowing to the people who buried his mother. She turned to Thaddeus. General, I understand your logic. Truly. But compromise with House Sorn is not survival. It is slower death. They will wait. Consolidate power. Then finish what they started because people who manipulate minds do not suddenly develop conscience. Thaddeus opened his mouth to argue. The war room doors exploded inward, not violently, just sudden. 2 guards stumbled through, faces pale, dragging a third man between them. A soldier in Sorn colors, bleeding from a dozen wounds, arrow shafts still lodged in his shoulder. He collapsed at Vaelor's feet, gasping. Treachery. Betrayal. They are coming now, not 4 days. Now. Vaelor crouched down. Speak clearly or die confused. The soldier coughed blood. Lord Severin, he is not marching on the capital. He is already here, inside the city. Your western garrison, General Marcus. He turned, opened the gates. 3,000 Sorn soldiers entered Vareth 2 hours ago. The room froze. Vaelor's voice came out deadly quiet. General Marcus has served this crown for 15 years. The dying soldier laughed. Wet, painful. He served House Sorn longer. They bought him years ago, waited for the right moment. This is it. He grabbed Vaelor's wrist with bloody fingers. They are not here to besiege. They are here to slaughter. Everyone loyal. Every servant who might remember the old queen. Every guard who knelt to her in the arena. Severin wants scorched earth. His grip loosened. He died before finishing the thought. Silence crashed through the war room, heavier than any sound could manage. Then chaos. Generals shouting, officers scrambling, maps being redrawn with shaking hands. Betrayal has a particular flavor. Not anger first. Shock. The absolute disorientation of discovering the ground beneath your feet was never solid to begin with. Vaelor stood slowly. His face showed nothing. No rage, no fear, nothing. That absence was more terrifying than any expression could be. When he spoke, his voice carried the cold precision of a man who had just watched his kingdom collapse and refused to acknowledge it yet. How many loyal troops inside the palace itself? Thaddeus checked reports with hands that shook slightly. 300. Maybe less if Marcus turned more officers than we know. And Sorn has 3,000 already inside the city walls. Yes. Vaelor looked at Selene. She looked back. And between them passed the understanding that sometimes love meant watching someone you would die for walk into fire. He turned to the generals. Evacuate the royal family. My son leaves immediately. Secret passages, eastern route. Get him to the border territories where Sorn influence is weakest. Your Majesty, if you evacuate the prince, you signal defeat. The entire capital will panic. Then let them panic. I will not sacrifice my son to maintain appearances. He grabbed Thaddeus by the shoulder. You commanded my armies for 20 years. I need you to do it for 20 more minutes. Hold the palace. Give me time to reach the wardstones. The wardstones? Ancient protections woven into Vareth's foundation centuries ago. They conceal the palace, create a barrier that even Sorn's numbers cannot break immediately. It buys us days, maybe a week. Thaddeus stared. Your Majesty, those ward stones have not been activated in 200 years. We do not even know if they still function. And the access chamber is on the opposite side of the palace. You would have to cross territory Marcus already controls. Then I better move fast. Vaelor turned to Selene. Stay here. Protect our son until he is safely evacuated. Then run. Get out of Vareth. Find loyalist territories and build an army. Come back when you are strong enough to take the kingdom properly. Selene's laugh came out sharp. You actually believe I am letting you go alone. This is not negotiable. Neither am I. She stepped close enough that no one else could hear. You spent 3 years without me because people stole that choice. Do not make that same mistake yourself. We survive together, or we die together. Those are the options. Vaelor held her gaze, saw certainty there that matched his own, understood arguing would waste time they did not have. He turned to Thaddeus. Change of plans. Selene comes with me. You get the prince out and hold this position until we activate the ward stones. General Thaddeus, a man who had survived 2 decades of war through careful calculation, looked at his king and queen and recognized the exact moment when strategy gave way to something more primal. Survival instinct. The kind that made cornered predators dangerous instead of desperate. He saluted. I will hold or die trying. Vaelor almost smiled. I am counting on the former. They left through a side passage that connected the war room to the palace's older sections. Stone corridors built before Vareth became an empire, when the kingdom was just a fortification holding back wilderness. Behind them, the palace erupted into controlled chaos, soldiers mobilizing, servants evacuating, Prince Arion being carried by his nursemaid through passages so secret most of the palace staff did not know they existed. Selene felt her son's presence disappear like a wound opening fresh. But she kept moving, because maternal instinct had to war with survival math. Her son lived if she activated those ward stones. He died if she stopped to say goodbye. Sometimes love meant choosing the cruelest option available. The older sections of the palace twisted like a maze designed by paranoid architects. Torches burned in iron sconces. Their footsteps echoed off stone that remembered violence older than current wars. Vaelor moved with the efficiency of someone who had memorized these routes during childhood paranoia. Selene followed, sword drawn, watching shadows like they might spawn enemies. They passed empty chambers, abandoned armories, hallways that had not seen footsteps in years. Then voices ahead, male, multiple, coming closer. Vaelor pulled Selene into a side alcove barely large enough for both, pressed against cold stone, his hand over her mouth. Not to silence, to remind her breathing carried in these spaces. 6 soldiers passed within feet of their hiding spot, Sorn colors, talking quietly among themselves. Marcus said the king would run for the ward stones. We find him, we end this tonight. You really think he is stupid enough to try activating 200-year-old magic while we control half the palace? Stupid or desperate. Either way, dead. They laughed and continued down the corridor. Selene felt Vaelor's heartbeat against her back. Steady, controlled, the kind of calm that came from accepting death as a possible outcome and choosing to move anyway. When the voices faded, they continued, deeper into the palace's bones. The wardstone chamber sat at Vareth's foundation, built into bedrock, protected by doors that required blood from the royal line to open. They reached the final corridor. Empty. Too empty. Vaelor's hand went to his sword. Trap, he said quietly. Obviously, Selene agreed. They walked forward anyway, because sometimes the only way out is through. The chamber doors stood open. Inside, torches illuminated a circular room carved entirely from black stone. Geometric patterns covered every surface. Ancient language neither of them could read. At the room's center, standing beside the wardstone altar, waited Lord Severin Sorn. He looked nothing like Selene expected. Not a warrior, not physically imposing, just an older man in expensive clothes with eyes that calculated profit margins while discussing genocide. Behind him stood 20 soldiers, and beside him, wearing the uniform of Vaelor's most trusted general, stood Marcus. The betrayer looked almost apologetic. Vaelor stopped at the chamber entrance, did not draw his sword, did not attack, just studied the man he had trusted for 15 years with the kind of focus that preceded violence. When he spoke, his voice carried no rage, just curiosity. How long? Marcus met his gaze. 12 years, since before you even conquered the Eastern Territories. House Sorn approached me with an offer. Wealth, protection for my family, a future that did not involve dying in your endless wars. He shrugged. You built an empire on loyalty, but loyalty is just a transaction, and House Sorn pays better. Vaelor absorbed this with the stillness of a man watching his entire worldview collapse in real time. I trusted you with my life, with my kingdom, with my family. I know, and you sold all of it for gold. Gold and survival. You taught me that, actually. Remember the siege at Blackwater? You said a smart commander always keeps a second option. So I did. Marcus gestured around the chamber. This was always going to end one way. House Sorn built their power over generations. You thought you could challenge that with love and instinct, and some buried queen nobody remembered. Admirable. Stupid. But admirable. Lord Severin stepped forward. His voice carried the cordial tone of a merchant closing a deal. King Vaelor, you have two choices. Surrender now. Abdicate in favor of House Sorn Regency. Your son lives. Your mate lives. You live, though imprisoned. Everyone survives. Or I kill you both in this chamber and hunt down your son over the following weeks. Either way, House Sorn rules Vareth. The only variable is how much blood soaks into the foundation before we claim what we already own. Silence filled the chamber like water rising. Vaelor looked at Selene, she looked back. And in that moment, they both understood the trap. Not the physical one, the philosophical one. They could surrender, save their lives, save their son, accept humiliation and imprisonment and slow death. Or they could fight, die here, leave their son orphaned and hunted. Both options destroyed them, just in different ways. This was the breaking point, the moment when survival required changing fundamental nature. Vaelor had built his entire reign on never bending, never compromising, never showing weakness. Selene had survived 3 years through invisible endurance. Now the universe demanded they choose. Be who they were and watch everything burn. Or become something else and maybe, possibly, survive long enough to rebuild. Vaelor's hand moved toward his sword. Selene caught his wrist. Their eyes met. She shook her head slightly. He understood. This was not their fight to win. Not anymore. They had already lost. The only question was how they managed defeat. Vaelor's hand fell away from his weapon. Lord Severin smiled. A wise choice. Vaelor looked at the man who had destroyed his kingdom and spoke with the cold clarity of someone pronouncing sentence rather than accepting it. You misunderstand. I am not surrendering to save myself. I am surrendering so my son grows up with parents instead of legends. So my mate survives to fight another day when the odds are not 8,000 to 300. He stepped forward. But understand this. You won today through betrayal and numbers. That is not the same as earning the kingdom. The moment your grip weakens, the moment your attention shifts, we will be there. And what comes next will not be war. It will be eradication. Severin's smile did not waver. Bold words for a defeated king. Guards, restrain them. Soldiers moved forward. Selene did not resist. Neither did Vaelor. They stood together while iron shackles closed around wrists and the chamber filled with the sound of their kingdom dying. Marcus watched with something that might have been regret. For what it is worth, you were a good king, just not good enough. Vaelor met his former general's gaze, and you were a loyal soldier. Right up until the moment loyalty required actual sacrifice. They were dragged from the chamber, through corridors now controlled by enemy forces, past bodies of guards who had died defending positions they could not hold. The palace had fallen in hours, not through siege. Through the simple reality that walls meant nothing when the men defending them chose betrayal over death. They threw Vaelor and Selene into cells deep beneath the palace, not the catacombs where Selene had spent 3 days before the trial. Deeper, older. The kind of prison built for kings who needed to disappear without record. Stone walls, iron doors. Darkness so complete it felt solid. Time stopped meaning anything. Hours, days. No way to measure. They brought food occasionally, water. Kept them alive because Lord Severin wanted leverage, not corpses. Selene sat against the wall, feeling power simmer beneath her skin. The white sovereign ability that could reshape allegiance. The transformation that made soldiers kneel, useless behind walls that predated her bloodline. Beside her, Vaelor existed in silence, not defeated exactly, but broken in a way that had nothing to do with chains. Finally, he spoke. I failed you. Again. Selene's laugh came out harsh. You failed yourself. I am exactly where I expected to be, either dead or imprisoned. Those were always the options when you fight empires built on generations of calculated cruelty. Then why did we try? Because the alternative was teaching our son that survival requires permanent submission, and I would rather he remember parents who fought than parents who bent. Vaelor turned toward her voice in darkness. What if he remembers nothing? What if Severin finds him despite Thaddeus's best efforts? What if we sacrificed everything and still lost? Then we lost fighting. That is all anyone gets. The illusion that dignity changes outcomes. Her voice softened slightly. 3 years ago, you bonded with a woman who had no political value, no strategic advantage. You married me anyway because instinct said it was right. House Sorn punished that choice, buried us both beneath false memory and false queens. Now we are here, chained in darkness, kingdom stolen, son in hiding, and I still would not change the choice you made. Because power built on lies always collapses eventually. Ours just collapsed faster than most. Silence returned. But different now. Not defeated. Resigned. The kind of acceptance that came from understanding some battles end before they begin, and the real fight is what you do with defeat. Above them, Lord Severin Sorn sat on the throne that did not belong to him and signed proclamations with authority he had stolen. House Sorn ruled Vareth, the king and queen who had challenged them rotted in cells designed for forgotten problems. The prince had disappeared into territories beyond Sorn reach. For now. Everything had gone according to plan. Yet Severin could not shake the feeling that burying white sovereigns never worked the first time. History proved that. They always came back. Usually when you least expected it. Usually when they were angry. And Selene Solarin Thorn had 3 years of buried rage plus new betrayal to fuel whatever came next. If she survived. If the cells did not break her first. If. The word that separated empires from ruins. In darkness, Selene pressed her palm against stone and felt something shift. Not the walls. Her. Surrender had bought time. Time for her son to escape. Time for loyal forces to regroup. Time for her to understand exactly what the white sovereign bloodline could do when rage replaced fear. She had spent 3 years as a ghost. 3 days as a revealed queen. 3 hours as a defeated prisoner. Now she would spend however long it took learning how to burn this entire kingdom down from the inside. Because Severin made one critical mistake. He kept her alive. And keeping a white sovereign alive meant eventually facing the consequences of every cruelty inflicted while she was powerless. The chains would not hold forever. The darkness would not suppress her permanently. And when she finally broke free, Lord Severin Sorn would learn the difference between ruling through stolen authority and facing a queen who had nothing left to lose. Vareth had seen empires rise and fall. Now it would witness something rarer, a bloodline thought extinct, a queen thought dead, a rage thought buried, all three erupting from darkness like dawn breaking violently across a landscape that had forgotten what real light looked like. The breaking was complete. What came next would not be recovery, it would be transformation. And kingdoms built on betrayal rarely survived queens who learned to weaponize survival itself. Darkness had weight, not metaphorical, physical, the kind that pressed against lungs and made breathing feel like theft. Selene had stopped counting days. Time meant nothing in cells built to erase people from history, just the rhythm of survival. Breathe, eat when food came. Stay conscious, stay angry. Anger kept you sharp, fear made you brittle. She pressed her palm against stone for the 100th time that hour and felt power simmer beneath skin. The white sovereign ability coiled inside her like a caged animal, useless behind walls, screaming to be released. Beside her in the adjoining cell, separated by iron bars, Vaelor existed in his own silence. She heard him breathing, steady, controlled, the kind of calm that meant he was either planning or dying inside. Maybe both. Finally, his voice cut through darkness. Tell me about the Solarin bloodline. Everything you remember. Selene shifted against cold stone. I remember nothing. Just what Osric told me before we got chained down here like inconvenient furniture. The White Sovereigns were emperors before Vareth existed, ruled through authority that bypassed choice. Not magic, not force, just recognition that something higher stood in the hierarchy. And that made them dangerous. It made them terrifying, because you cannot fight authority that lives in your bones, cannot rebel against instinct that says submit. Every ruler who inherited power through violence knew the Solarian line could end them with a look, so they hunted us to extinction. She laughed quietly. Bitter. Almost extinction. Turns out one survived. Ended up scrubbing floors in her own palace while fake queens sat on stolen thrones. History has a vicious sense of humor. Vaelor's hand reached through the bars. Found hers in darkness. When we get out of here. If we get out. When? When we get out, I'm going to burn House Sorn so thoroughly that future generations will not remember they ever existed. His grip tightened. And then I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to be invisible again. Selene said nothing, because promises made in darkness had a habit of dying in daylight. But she held his hand anyway, because sometimes hope was just stubbornness wearing different clothes. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Multiple. Torchlight preceded them like a warning. The cell door opened and Lord Severin Sorn entered flanked by 4 guards. He carried a torch in one hand and casual authority in his posture. Behind him walked someone unexpected. Varela. No longer the perfect queen in silver and white, now dressed in practical leather, hair pulled back, face harder. She looked like someone who had spent weeks in similar cells and come out meaner. Selene sat up slowly. Vaelor rose to his feet. Severin studied them with the clinical interest of someone examining investments. 3 weeks. You have been down here 3 weeks while I stabilized the kingdom, executed the remaining loyalists, consolidated power. Vareth accepts House Sorn rule now. Not enthusiastically, but acceptance is all empires require. He gestured toward Varela. My daughter suggested I kill you immediately. Clean, efficient, no possibility of future trouble. Varela's voice came out cold. I still suggest it. Severin smiled. But I disagree. Dead martyrs inspire rebellions. Living prisoners inspire nothing but pity. So I have a different proposal. He crouched down to eye level with Selene. Renounce your claim to the throne. Publicly. In front of the entire court. Declare Vaelor an unfit king. Acknowledge House Sorn as rightful rulers. Do this, and I let you live. Quietly. In exile. With your son. The cell went silent. Then Selene laughed. Not hysteria, pure disbelief. You actually think I would betray everything I am to save my own life? Not to save your life. To save your son's. The laughter stopped. Severin's smile widened. Prince Aerion. We found him 2 days ago. Thaddeus did admirable work hiding him. But gold loosens tongues, and we had a great deal of gold. The boy is currently in a very comfortable room, guarded, fed, unharmed. He paused for effect. For now. Selene felt ice spread through her chest. Not fear, clarity. The absolute understanding that some threats changed everything. If you hurt my son, I will do nothing to your son. You will. By choosing pride over his survival, by making him pay the price for your inability to bend. Severin stood. You have 1 hour to decide. Renounce your claim and live in exile with your child. Refuse and I will raise him myself. Teach him that his mother cared more about crowns than his life. Turn him into a weapon against everything you represent. He turned to leave. Vaelor's voice stopped him. You will not break her. You can threaten, torture, kill. But you will not make Selene Solarin Thorn renounce what she is, because that requires something you have never understood. What is that? Integrity. Severin's expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger. Contempt. Integrity. The luxury of people who never had to make difficult choices. I built House Sorn through 3 generations of calculated cruelty because that is what survival requires. Your integrity is just pride wearing moral clothing. He walked to the door. 1 hour. Then I start teaching your son what happens to children whose parents choose wrong. They left. Torchlight faded. Darkness returned heavier than before. Selene sat perfectly still, not moving, not speaking, just breathing while her mind raced through possibilities that all ended badly. Renounce her claim and live. Watch her son grow up knowing his mother bent to save him, teaching him that survival required surrender. Or refuse and condemn that same son to being raised by the people who had destroyed his parents, weaponized against everything she represented. Both options were death, just different kinds. This was the choice empires forced on people who challenged them. Not clean victories or heroic deaths, just slow suffocation disguised as mercy. Vaelor spoke quietly. What are you thinking? That Severin is right. Integrity is a luxury, and we cannot afford it anymore. You are not seriously considering, I am considering that our son matters more than crowns, more than pride, more than revenge. If renouncing my claim keeps him alive and with us, then maybe that is the only choice that matters. Her voice cracked slightly. I spent 3 years invisible. I can do it again if that is what protects him. Selene, listen to me. Vaelor gripped the bars between their cells. If you renounce who you are, if you teach our son that survival requires permanent submission, then Severin wins completely. Not just the kingdom, your soul, everything that makes you dangerous to people like him. She turned toward his voice. Then what do you suggest? Because I am open to options that do not end with my child being raised as a weapon against me. We fight. With what? We are chained in cells, no weapons, no allies, no way out. Fighting is not an option, it is suicide. Sometimes those are the same thing. Silence pressed between them. Then Selene felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope, rage. The kind that had been building for 3 years of invisible suffering, plus 3 weeks of darkness, plus the absolute violation of someone threatening her child. That rage found the white sovereign power coiled beneath her skin, and fed it. Her breathing changed, faster, harder. Heat spread through her body like wildfire. Vaelor noticed immediately. Selene, what are you doing? Testing a theory. What theory? That walls only matter if you accept them as permanent. Power erupted. Not gradual, not controlled. Explosive. Silver light flooded the cell. Brighter than torches. Brighter than daylight. Bright enough that Vaelor shielded his eyes and guards 3 corridors away started shouting. Selene's body convulsed. Transformation ripped through her faster than before. Bones cracked. Reformed. Skin rippled. The pain felt like being torn apart and rebuilt simultaneously. She did not scream. Screaming wasted air. Instead, she channeled everything into the change. When light faded, a white wolf stood where Selene had been kneeling. Massive. Primal. Eyes still human, but body ancient and absolutely done with cages. The iron bars separating her cell from Vaelor's bent like grass under wind. Not melted. Just recognized that something higher in the hierarchy had decided they were inconvenient. The wolf turned toward the cell door. Growled. The sound carried weight beyond volume. Authority that bypassed logic and struck directly into hindbrain instinct. The iron door did not bend. It shattered, metal screaming, hinges tearing from stone, the entire structure collapsing like it had been waiting centuries for permission to fail. Guards rushed down the corridor, saw the white wolf, stopped, not from courage failing, from instinct overriding training. Every part of their bodies recognized that running was the only intelligent response to what stood before them. The wolf did not chase, just watched them scatter with eyes that promised mercy was no longer on the table. Selene turned back to Vaelor's cell. Transformation reversed, light flared, bones reformed. She collapsed human again. Naked, bleeding from a dozen places where change had been too violent, but standing, barely. Vaelor stared. How did you... Rage. Turns out when you threaten a mother's child, walls become suggestions. She grabbed the twisted bars of his cell. They were still hot from whatever had just happened. Her hands burned, but she pulled anyway. Metal screamed again, bent, created an opening just wide enough for Vaelor to squeeze through. He stepped into the corridor, grabbed her shoulders. We need to move, now. Every guard in this section knows something broke free. Where do we go? Severin has my son, has the palace, has 8,000 soldiers between us and any exit. Selene met his gaze. Then we go through them. With what? We have no weapons, no armor. You just burn through enough power that you are bleeding from your eyes. She wiped blood away with the back of her hand. I have rage. You have strategy. And somewhere in this palace is our son. That is all we need. Vaelor studied her face, saw certainty there that had nothing to do with logic, recognized it as the moment when cornered predators became exponentially more dangerous than free ones. Because people with everything to lose calculate risks, people with nothing left burn the building down. He kissed her, hard, fast. Then let us burn it all. They moved. No plan, no strategy, just forward momentum fueled by desperation and the absolute refusal to die in darkness. The palace catacombs twisted like diseased intestines. Severin had not bothered mapping these sections. Too old. Too irrelevant. That irrelevance saved them. They climbed through passages that had not seen feet in centuries, emerged 3 levels up in the old armory. Weapons lined the walls, swords, spears, axes, all outdated but functional. Vaelor grabbed a blade that felt right, tested the weight. Selene pulled on leather armor that did not fit and took 2 daggers because swords required training she never had. Footsteps echoed nearby. Lots of them. Vaelor moved to the door, peered through gaps. 50 soldiers. Maybe more. Searching. Lord Severin is not taking chances. He knows you broke out and he is flooding the palace with bodies. 50 versus 2. Terrible odds. We need a distraction. Selene looked at the armor, the weapons, the old banners from wars decades past, then at the torch burning on the wall. I have an idea. You will hate it. Most of your ideas fall into that category. What is it? She grabbed the torch, held it near a tapestry older than the kingdom. We make them think the palace is burning. Panic spreads faster than soldiers. Chaos is the only advantage we have. Vaelor grabbed her wrist. You set fire to Vareth Palace, you destroy history. Centuries of culture, our own legacy. Severin already destroyed our legacy. This is just making it official. She pulled free and touched torch to fabric. The tapestry caught immediately, dry, ancient, perfect kindling. Fire spread fast. Not magical, just hungry. Within minutes, smoke filled corridors. Alarm bells started ringing, soldiers shouting. The organized search dissolved into panic as men realized they were trapped in burning sections. Vaelor watched centuries of history turn to ash, then grabbed Selene's hand. Move. They ran through smoke and chaos. Guards stumbled past them. Nobody stopped to question, too focused on evacuation. The palace had become a confusion zone where authority collapsed and survival instinct ruled. Selene felt blood running down her back from wounds that had not healed, felt power simmering but unstable. The transformation earlier had cost more than she wanted to admit, but she kept moving. Because stopping meant capture. And capture meant watching Severin turn her son into exactly what she feared. They reached the royal wing. Severin would keep Arian close. Not in dungeons. Not where fire could reach. Somewhere defendable but accessible. The nursery. Same place where this entire disaster began 3 weeks ago when Selene held her son and the Empire realized she existed. 2 guards stood outside, alert, armed, not panicking despite smoke drifting through corridors. Professionals. Vaelor did not slow down, just charged. The guards raised weapons. Vaelor hit the first one like a battering ram. They went down together, blade versus blade. No elegance, just violence born from 20 years of surviving through brutality. The second guard turned towards Selene. She threw a dagger, not accurate, not trained, but desperate. The blade hit his shoulder, not fatal but shocking enough that he stumbled. Selene closed distance, grabbed his sword arm, kneed him in the groin. When he bent forward, she slammed her elbow into his face until he stopped moving. Behind her, Vaelor finished the first guard. Both men lay unconscious, maybe dead. No time to check. The nursery door stood open. Inside, torchlight illuminated a room unchanged from memory. Cradle. Tapestries. The window overlooking gardens where winter still clung despite spring trying to break through. And beside the window, holding Prince Arion, stood Virella. She wore full battle armor now, sword at her hip. But she held the child gently, almost tenderly. She turned as they entered. I wondered how long before you found him. Put him down. Virella's expression stayed neutral. He is not hurt. I would never hurt a child. Regardless of what you think of me, I have limits. You manipulated a kingdom, buried a queen alive, stole 3 years. Do not talk to me about limits. Fair. Virella set Arion gently in his cradle, stepped away with hands visible, non-threatening, but did not leave. Selene moved to the cradle, looked down at her son. Arion slept peacefully, unaware that his entire world balanced on the edge of violence. She felt her chest crack open, not from pain, from the overwhelming certainty that this child mattered more than crowns, more than kingdoms, more than revenge. Everything else was just decoration. Varela spoke quietly behind her. You think I am a monster, that House Sorn represents everything wrong with power. Maybe you are right, but I want you to understand something. I do not care about your justifications, not justification. Context. Varela moved to the window, looked out at the burning sections of palace visible in the distance. My father taught me that survival requires ruthlessness, that mercy is just weakness wearing moral costume. He built House Sorn through calculated cruelty because that is what worked, what succeeded, what turned us from minor nobility into the most powerful family in Vareth. She turned back. And I believed him, internalized it, became exactly what he needed, the perfect weapon daughter who would do anything to maintain family power. Selene lifted Arion from the cradle, held him close. And now you want me to feel sorry for you? To understand that you are also a victim? No. I want you to understand that I am tired. The admission hung in the air like confession. Varela's mask cracked completely. I spent years becoming what my father needed, buried my own humanity, manipulated your husband, stole your life. And for what? So House Sorn could rule? So my father could add another generation to his legacy? She laughed bitterly. I spent 3 weeks in those same cells you just escaped. My father put me there after the arena. Punishment for failing, for letting you survive long enough to transform. He said I had become weak, sentimental, a liability. Vaelor spoke for the first time. So this is what? Redemption? No, this is exhaustion. I'm tired of being a weapon, tired of calculating every action against family legacy, tired of winning and still feeling empty. She moved to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. The eastern gate is undermanned. Severin pulled troops to fight the fires. You have maybe 20 minutes before he reorganizes. Take your son. Run. Do not stop until you reach territories beyond Sorn influence. Why are you helping us? Because watching you fight for your child reminded me I used to want things beyond power. And maybe if you survive, it proves that instinct and love are not just pretty words that get crushed by reality. Varela looked back one last time, for what it is worth. I am sorry, not for trying, but for succeeding. You deserve better than being buried alive. She left, footsteps fading down burning corridors. Selene looked at Vaelor. Do we trust her? No, but she is right about the eastern gate, and we have no better options. They moved. Selene carried Arion wrapped tight against her chest. Vaelor led with sword drawn. They navigated through smoke and chaos toward the eastern section. The palace burned around them. Not entirely, not fatally, but enough that confusion reigned and authority fragmented. They reached the eastern gate. 4 guards, alert but focused on fires behind them instead of escape routes. Vaelor approached directly. No stealth, just authority. Open the gate. The guards turned, recognized their king despite weeks of imprisonment and blood painting his armor. One stammered, Your Majesty, Lord Severin ordered, I am giving you a direct order. Open the gate or die where you stand. The guards looked at each other. Calculated odds. 3 weeks of Severin's rule versus 20 years of Vaelor's reign. New master versus old loyalty. The gate opened. Selene did not wait to see if they changed their minds, just ran through with her son clutched tight. Vaelor followed. Behind them, someone started shouting. Alarm bells rang louder. They were through, outside palace walls, into the city. Vareth at night looked different from Freedom's side. Not safer, just different. Soldiers patrolled streets, citizens locked doors. The empire that had been stable for decades now teetered under new rule. Change had that effect. It broke familiar patterns and replaced them with uncertainty. Vaelor grabbed Selene's arm. We need horses, money, supplies. Cannot run far carrying a child on foot. Where? There is a safe house, 2 streets south. Loyalists maintained it for emergencies. If it still stands, we can regroup there. They moved through alleys and shadows, avoided main streets where patrols concentrated, reached the safe house, small, unremarkable, exactly the kind of place that survived because nobody noticed it. Vaelor knocked. 3 times. Pause. Twice more. Code from wars ago. The door opened. Old Thaddeus stood there, battered, bleeding, but alive. And behind him, a dozen loyal soldiers. The general's face cracked into something between smile and grimace. "Your Majesty, we thought you were dead." "Not yet, but close enough." They stumbled inside. Thaddeus secured the door. The dozen soldiers in the safe house represented all that remained of loyalist forces inside the capital. Everyone else was dead, captured, or bent knee to Severin. Thaddeus laid out their situation with brutal honesty. "We have no resources, no supplies, no support. Severin controls the military, the treasury, the palace, everything. You escaping just makes him look weak. He will hunt you until he finishes this." Vaelor sat heavily. "Then we run, get out of Vareth, regroup in eastern territories where Sorn influence is thinner, build an army, come back stronger." Thaddeus shook his head. "Your Majesty. Running means abandoning the capital, means letting Severin consolidate power for months while you rebuild from nothing. By the time you return, he will be unbeatable. So what do you suggest?" "We end this tonight." Everyone turned toward the old general. Thaddeus pointed at Selene. "Your queen is a white sovereign, the only power that bypasses choice and strikes directly into instinct. Severin has 8,000 soldiers, but they follow him from calculation. Not loyalty, not bone-deep certainty. Show them something that breaks calculation, something primal, and watch how fast authority built on fear collapses." Selene looked down at Arion sleeping in her arms. "What exactly are you proposing?" Thaddeus met her gaze. "March back to that palace. Transform in front of Severin's army. Make them feel what it means to stand before a white sovereign at full power. Not controlled, not measured. Pure primal authority that reminds them they are prey pretending to be predators." The room went silent. Then Vaelor spoke. "You are suggesting she walk into 8,000 soldiers and hope instinct overcomes orders. I am suggesting she remind them what real power looks like. Before Severin, before House Sorn, before any of this. There was the Solaran bloodline, and they ruled because biology recognized them as apex." He turned to Selene. "Transformation almost killed you earlier. I know, I saw the blood. But half measures do not win wars. If you're going to burn through power anyway, burn through all of it. Make sure when you die, every soldier in that army remembers exactly what they killed." Selene felt her son's heartbeat against her chest, felt power coiled inside waiting to be released, felt rage that had been building for 3 years and 3 weeks and every moment of being buried alive. She looked at Vaelor. "If I do this, if I transform at full power in front of Severin's army, I probably die." The human body was not built to channel that level of authority. "Osric said so weeks ago." "I know. And you're okay with that?" "No. But I'm okay with you making the choice yourself instead of having it made for you." Selene stood, handed Arion to Thaddeus. The old general took the child carefully. "Keep him safe. Regardless of what happens, get him out of the capital. Raise him somewhere House Sorn cannot reach. Teach him his mother was not a ghost, was not invisible, was a queen who burned the kingdom down rather than let her son inherit lies." Thaddeus nodded. "I will guard him with my life." She kissed Arion's forehead, then turned to Vaelor. "Are you coming?" He grabbed his sword. "Until the end." They walked back toward the palace through streets that smelled like smoke and revolution. 12 soldiers followed. Not enough to win, just enough to make a statement. When they reached the palace gates, Severin's army waited. 8,000 strong, armored, armed, professional, standing between 2 escaped prisoners and any hope of victory. Lord Severin stood at the front, calm, collected, dressed like he had already won because by every calculation he had. He saw Selene and Vaelor approach, smiled. "This is your grand strategy? 12 soldiers in desperation?" "I expected more." Selene walked forward alone, stopped 20 feet from the massed army, looked at 8,000 men who calculated odds and found themselves overwhelmingly favored, then spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "You follow Severin because he pays well, because loyalty is transactional, Because survival requires bending to whoever holds power. I understand that. Lived that. Accepted it for 3 years. But tonight you're going to remember something your ancestors knew. Before kingdoms. Before politics. Before gold mattered. Authority was not bought. It was recognized. She closed her eyes. Felt power rise. Felt her body prepared to burn through everything in one final explosion of primal authority. And let transformation take her completely. Light erupted. Not silver this time, pure white. Blinding. The entire city felt it. Selene's body convulsed. Bones shattered and reformed. Skin rippled. The transformation was not controlled, not measured. It was absolute. When light faded, a white wolf stood before 8,000 soldiers, larger than before. Presence that made air feel heavy. Eyes that recognized every single man as prey. The wolf opened its jaws and howled. The sound carried beyond volume, beyond words. It struck directly into hindbrain instinct where rational thought could not reach. 8,000 soldiers felt their knees weaken, felt the overwhelming certainty that something higher existed in the hierarchy, felt calculation dissolve into recognition. Some dropped weapons. Others knelt, not from loyalty to Selene, from biological certainty that standing was no longer an option their bodies would permit. Lord Severin screamed orders. "Hold position! She is one wolf! We are 8,000! But orders meant nothing when instinct overrode choice. The army collapsed, not in defeat, in submission. The white sovereign stood before them, and biology declared the argument over. Vaelor watched his mate burn through power that would kill her, watched an army crumble, and understood that victory felt nothing like triumph when purchased with everything you loved. The wolf's legs trembled. Blood leaked from her eyes, her ears. Places transformation should not cause bleeding. She was dying, burning out, but still standing, still projecting authority that made 8,000 men feel like children before an angry god. Lord Severin's confident mask shattered. He looked at his crumbling army, at the wolf that should not exist, at the kingdom slipping through fingers he had calculated would hold forever, and made his final calculation. He drew his sword, charged the wolf alone, not from courage, from understanding that sometimes losing meant choosing how you fell. The wolf saw him coming, did not move, just watched. And in that moment, everyone understood. Severin was not attacking. He was begging for death rather than watching everything he built collapse. The wolf opened her jaws. The wolf did not kill Lord Severin Sorn. Not immediately, not mercifully. She caught his sword arm mid-swing with jaws that could have crushed bone but chose pressure instead. Held him suspended between attack and consequence while 8,000 soldiers watched their commander dangle like a puppet whose strings had been cut by something older than politics. Severin screamed. Not pain, rage. The kind that came from realizing calculation had limits, and he had just exceeded every single one. The wolf released him. He fell hard, rolled, came up with sword still gripped but hands shaking. Blood ran from puncture wounds in his arm, but the damage was minimal, surgical. A message delivered through restraint instead of slaughter. That was the difference between dominance born from fear and authority earned through restraint. One killed to prove it could. The other spared to prove it did not need to. Severin looked at the wolf, at his army kneeling, at the kingdom he had stolen now slipping through fingers too weak to hold it. He raised his sword one more time, not to attack, to salute, the gesture of a warrior acknowledging superior force before choosing death over dishonor. Then he drove the blade toward his own chest. Transformation reversed before steel could pierce flesh. Light flared, bones cracked. The wolf became woman and Selene collapsed forward onto hands and knees. Naked, bleeding from places that should not bleed, trembling with exhaustion that went deeper than muscle. But conscious. Barely. She grabbed Severin's wrist before the blade completed its arc, stopped the suicide with strength that should not have existed in a body burning itself out. Their eyes met, his filled with confusion. Why would she stop him? Why grant mercy after everything stolen? Hers filled with something harder to name. Not forgiveness. Understanding. She spoke through labored breathing that made every word cost. You do not get to die noble. Do not get to escape judgment by choosing your own ending. You wanted to rule through calculated cruelty? Then live with the consequences when calculation fails. She pulled the sword from his grip, tossed it aside. Lord Severin's Sorn collapsed. Not from wounds, from the absolute destruction of a worldview built over 3 generations. House Sorn had survived through ruthless pragmatism, through understanding that power required suppressing weakness. Now that entire philosophy lay shattered before a woman who had survived being buried alive and refused to let death be the easy answer for anyone. Selene tried to stand, failed. Her legs would not support weight anymore. Transformation at full power had burned through reserves her body did not possess. She was dying, just slower than expected. Vaelor crossed the distance between them in seconds, caught her before she collapsed completely, wrapped his cloak around her nakedness, held her while she bled and trembled and refused to stop being conscious because unconscious meant losing control. She looked up at him with eyes that still held defiance despite everything. Our son. Safe. Thaddeus has him. They're already gone. Out of the city. Beyond Severin's reach. Good. Her breathing hitched. That is all that matters. Everything else is just decoration. Vaelor pressed his forehead against hers. You are not decoration. You are the queen. My mate. The reason any of this was worth fighting for. She smiled. Weak, but genuine. Pretty words from a king who spent 3 years forgetting I existed. Not by choice. I know, but facts do not care about choice. You forgot me. I survived anyway. Now we both remember. That is more than most people get. Her eyes started closing. Vaelor shook her gently. Stay awake. Stay with me. We won. The army surrendered. Severin is defeated. You do not get to die after surviving everything else. Surviving is not the same as living. Then live. God damn it, Selene, live. She looked at him with the brutal honesty of someone too exhausted for lies. I burned through 3 years of suppressed power in 3 minutes. My body is shutting down. Osric warned us. White sovereigns who push too hard do not fade gracefully. They burn out. So what? You just give up? I won. That is not giving up. That is accepting the price. Silence fell between them while the city burned and an army knelt and empire restructured itself around consequences nobody had calculated properly. Then Osric's voice cut through from behind. Move aside. Let me see her. The old physician knelt beside Selene with his leather case and expression that had witnessed every kind of death and refused to accept most of them. He examined her quickly, efficiently, checking wounds that bled wrong, eyes that showed blood vessels bursting, skin too pale, breathing too shallow. His assessment came out clinical. You are dying. Transformation consumed more energy than your human form can sustain. Organs are failing. Brain is hemorrhaging. You have hours, maybe less. Selene absorbed this without emotion. Can you stop it? No. Can you slow it? Osric paused, calculated, made the kind of ethical decision physicians spent careers avoiding. There is one option. Experimental, dangerous, probably fatal. More fatal than definitely dying in hours? Fair point. He opened his case, began preparing instruments. The white sovereign bloodline is not entirely human. Your ancestors survived by adapting, becoming something that lived between human and wolf. Most stayed human because control mattered. But in theory, if transformation became permanent, if you stayed wolf, your body might stabilize in that form. Selene processed this slowly. You are suggesting I stay a wolf, forever. I am suggesting you choose which death you prefer. Human death in hours, or potential survival as a wolf with no guarantee you keep human consciousness. What are the odds consciousness survives? 10%. Maybe less. She looked at Vaelor. He looked back. And between them passed the understanding that some choices had no good options, just different versions of loss. Vaelor spoke quietly. If you do this, if you transform permanently, I might lose you completely. Get a wolf with your face, but none of the person I love inside. Or you bury your mate for the 2nd time in a month. Those are the options. There has to be another way. There is not. You spent 20 years building an empire through accepting brutal reality. Do not start lying to yourself now. She reached up, touched his face with fingers that trembled. If consciousness survives, I will find you. Somehow. Even as a wolf. I will make you remember I still exist inside whatever form I am wearing. And if it does not, then you raise our son. Teach him his mother was not invisible, was not a ghost, was a queen who burned everything to protect what mattered. That is enough legacy for any life. Vaelor felt something break inside his chest. Not pain, acceptance. The kind that came from understanding love sometimes meant watching someone you would die for choose their own ending. He kissed her, held her, then let Osric work. The physician prepared the ritual with materials pulled from centuries-old texts, blood, bone dust, compounds that smelled like earth and winter, and things that should not mix. He painted symbols across Selene's skin, ancient language, Solaran markings designed to anchor consciousness during permanent transformation. No guarantee they worked, just hope wearing ceremonial costume. When preparation finished, Osric stepped back. Once this starts, you cannot reverse it. Transformation will consume everything human until only wolf remains. If consciousness survives, you will be aware inside a body that thinks differently, sees differently, exists differently. If it does not survive, you become what you appear to be. A white wolf, dangerous, intelligent, but no longer Selene. She looked at the army still kneeling, at Severin broken, at Vaelor whose face showed every emotion he refused to speak, then at the city beyond where her son existed safe because she had burned herself out protecting him. Worth it. She closed her eyes. Do it. Osric began the ritual. Words and languages dead before Vareth existed. Compounds poured across skin, symbols activating through methods nobody truly understood anymore. Power responded. Not gently. The white sovereign ability that had been killing her suddenly found purpose, direction. Instead of burning her human form to ash, it began transforming completely. Light erupted again, brighter than before, painful to witness. Selene's body convulsed, bones cracked with sounds like trees splitting in winter storms. Skin rippled, muscle reformed. Every human aspect dissolved and rebuilt as wolf. The process took minutes that felt like hours. Screaming filled the air. Not pain, resistance. Her human consciousness fighting to maintain identity while biology insisted wolves did not work that way. Then silence. Light faded. Where Selene had been kneeling now stood a white wolf, massive, beautiful, eyes that held intelligence but no longer looked quite human. The wolf blinked slowly, looked around, saw Vaelor. Recognition flickered, or maybe just animal curiosity about the man kneeling beside her. Impossible to tell. Vaelor reached out slowly, gave the wolf time to pull away. When she did not, he touched her head with fingers that shook. Selene, are you still in there? The wolf stared at him, then did something unexpected. She pressed her head against his palm. Not submission, acknowledgement, the gesture of someone saying, I am here without words to express it. Vaelor felt tears he had not cried in decades break free, not from sadness, from understanding that survival sometimes meant accepting unrecognizable versions of people you loved. Osric watched with clinical interest. Consciousness appears intact, limited, changed, but present. She is not entirely wolf, not entirely human, something between. Exactly what the Solaran bloodline was before civilization demanded they choose. Can she understand me? Unknown. Wolf brains process differently. She might understand emotion without comprehending language, or she might retain everything but lack the ability to respond in ways humans recognize. The physician packed his case. Time will tell, but she is alive. That is more than I expected. He left. Guards began organizing around the kneeling army, securing weapons, processing surrender. The logistics of empire rebuilding started immediately because kingdoms did not pause for personal grief. General Thaddeus returned from securing Prince Arion, saw the wolf, understood immediately what had happened. Your Majesty, the prince is safe. Eastern territories are mobilizing loyalist forces. We can rebuild. Vaelor stood slowly. The wolf stood beside him, close enough that her shoulder pressed against his leg. Thaddeus continued. Lord Severin Sorn awaits judgment. What are your orders? Vaelor looked at the broken man who had stolen his kingdom and buried his mate twice. felt rage that should have demanded execution, found something colder instead: exile. Strip House Sorn of titles, lands, and military command. Send Severin to the border territories. Let him live, knowing he calculated wrong and lost everything because of it. Execution would be mercy. Living with failure is punishment. Thaddeus nodded. And Lady Varela? Vaelor paused, considered the woman who had helped them escape despite being part of the original conspiracy. Exile as well, different territory. She helped us when calculation said she should not. That earns her life. Nothing more. The general saluted and left to execute orders. The wolf watched everything with eyes that held intelligence but remained impossible to fully read. Vaelor looked down at her. I do not know if you understand me. Do not know how much of Selene still exists behind those eyes, but I'm going to talk anyway because silence feels like surrender. He crouched down. We won. The kingdom is ours again. Our son is safe. Everything we fought for, we have. But the cost was you. Your human form, your voice, everything that made you recognizably you. The wolf tilted her head. Listening or just responding to tone? Unclear. Vaelor continued. I spent 3 years not knowing you existed. Cannot do that again. So wolf or human or whatever you are now, you stay beside me. We figure this out together. That is non-negotiable. The wolf leaned forward, licked his face. Once. The gesture so distinctly Selene despite the form that Vaelor laughed through tears. I will take that as agreement. Days passed into weeks. Vareth rebuilt slowly. Fire damage repaired. Loyalist forces recalled. House Sorn dismantled piece by piece until only ruins remained of 3 generations of calculated cruelty. King Vaelor ruled from a throne that felt heavier than before. Beside him, where queens traditionally sat, stood a white wolf. The court adjusted. Some nobles whispered. Most learned quickly that whispers around a white sovereign carried consequences. Instinct enforced regardless of human politics. The wolf attended every council meeting, every judgment, every decision. She did not speak, did not need to. Her presence alone reminded everyone that authority had layers beyond titles and calculation. Prince Arion grew. At 2 years old, he did not remember the chaos, just knew the white wolf that slept beside his cradle every night was important. Special. His. He called her mother in the way children name things without needing explanation, and the wolf responded. Protective, gentle, patient in ways wolves typically were not. Consciousness survived transformation. Just changed. Selene existed inside the wolf. Vaelor saw evidence daily, the way she responded to their son, how she positioned herself during council meetings, small gestures that proved human thought still guided animal instinct. But communication remained limited to what body language could express. At night, Vaelor lay beside the wolf in chambers designed for human occupants and talked. Told her about the day, about decisions made, about nobles being frustrating and generals being cautious, and all the mundane details of ruling that never made it into legends. The wolf listened, sometimes rested her head on his chest, sometimes just breathed steadily while he processed the weight of surviving everything they had survived. One night, 6 months after transformation, Vaelor spoke the truth he had been avoiding. I miss your voice, miss hearing you argue, miss the way you saw through political nonsense and called it what it was. The wolf shifted position, looked at him with eyes that held frustration about being unable to respond the way she wanted. Vaelor continued, but I prefer you alive and silent than dead and perfect. So we adapt. Figure out new ways to communicate. Build something different than what we had. He touched her head gently. That is what survival means, not returning to what was, building from what remains. The wolf pressed closer. And in that moment, they both understood. Love was not the feeling preserved in amber. It was the willingness to recognize someone in forms you never expected and choose them anyway. Years accumulated. Prince Arion grew into a child who understood his mother was different, but never treated her as less. He learned to read her body language the way other children learn to read faces, understood when she was pleased by the way her tail moved, knew when she was concerned by how close she stayed, recognized pride in the way she watched him during training, The kingdom accepted the strangeness because results mattered more than tradition. Vareth prospered under a king who made decisions in consultation with a wolf, whose presence alone reminded people that power had limits. Rebellions were few, not from fear, from the understanding that challenging authority backed by primal recognition was calculation destined to fail. Lord Severin Sorn died in exile 5 years after his defeat. Alone. Forgotten. A man who built empire through ruthless pragmatism and lost everything because he never understood the difference between being feared and being recognized as necessary. Varela disappeared into obscurity. Some said she became a healer in remote territories. Others claimed she died quietly. Nobody knew for certain. She had been a weapon daughter who learned too late that weapons could not build what survived beyond violence. On Prince Arion's 10th birthday, Vaelor stood in the royal gardens watching his son play. The white wolf lay beside him. Older now. Gray starting to show around her muzzle. Still massive, still commanding presence, but softer. The way all predators softened when they found territory worth protecting instead of conquering. Vaelor spoke quietly. "Do you remember the arena? When you transformed and I remembered everything? That moment when the entire kingdom watched you prove they had buried something they should not have?" The wolf's ear flicked, listening. "I thought that was the climax, the moment when we won. But I was wrong. We did not win in the arena. We survived it. We won in all the moments after, in choosing each other despite everything being wrong, in rebuilding when logic said we should stay broken." He looked down at her. "You gave up your voice to survive. I would give up mine if it meant you stayed. That is marriage, not the ceremony, not the titles, just the willingness to exist in whatever form keeps both of us breathing." The wolf stood, walked a few paces away, then did something she had not done in years. Light began to shimmer around her, faint, uncertain, transformation attempting to reverse. Vaelor's breath caught. The wolf's body convulsed. Bones started cracking, flesh rippling, then stopped. The light faded, transformation incomplete. The wolf stood there, panting from effort, still entirely animal. She turned back toward Vaelor with eyes that held frustration and resignation. Human form was gone. This was permanent. But she had tried. For him. That effort meant more than success ever could. Vaelor crossed the distance, knelt beside her. "You do not need to change. I love the person you are now, not the ghost of who you were." The wolf leaned into him. And they stayed that way while their son played and the kingdom functioned and empire continued around them. Because that was the truth nobody taught about surviving catastrophe. It was not dramatic recovery. It was quiet acceptance that some things broke beyond repair and love meant building with the pieces instead of mourning the loss. On Vaelor's 60th birthday, he stood before the court and made an announcement. "When I die, my son inherits the throne. That is tradition. But I am adding one condition. The white wolf stays beside him as advisor, as protector, as the reminder that authority requires more than titles. She has served this kingdom for 20 years in a form nobody expected. She will continue until her body fails or the kingdom no longer needs her presence. This is not a request. This is law." The court accepted because arguing with 20 years of prosperity seemed stupid. Prince Arion accepted because he had never known ruling without his mother's presence. The wolf accepted because choices only mattered when you had them, and she had made hers years ago. Survive, protect, adapt. Those were the pillars that outlasted empires built on ambition. Vaelor died at 68, peacefully, in his sleep, with the white wolf curled beside him the way she had been for decades. When servants found them in the morning, the wolf refused to leave his body for 3 days. Grief translated across species without losing meaning. Eventually, Prince Arion, now King Arion, convinced her to move, not through force, through gentle insistence that Vaelor would have wanted her to keep living instead of dying beside him. The wolf followed her son, stood beside his throne the way she had stood beside his father's, became legend. The White Queen who gave up humanity to save a kingdom and never regretted the choice. Children told stories about her, how she had been buried alive and clawed her way back, how she had faced 8,000 soldiers and made them kneel through presence alone, how she had chosen survival over pride and love over form. The stories grew embellished over generations, details changed, facts blurred into myth, but the core remained. That power came in forms nobody expected. That authority required recognition, not force. That survival sometimes meant accepting unrecognizable versions of yourself and choosing to keep breathing anyway. The White Wolf lived 15 more years after Vaelor's death, long enough to see her son become a king worth the sacrifice, long enough to watch her grandchildren grow, long enough to understand that legacy was not about being remembered perfectly. It was about leaving the world different than you found it. On a winter morning when snow covered Vareth like forgiveness, the White Wolf walked into the gardens where she had played with Arion decades before. She lay down beneath the tree where Vaelor had proposed rebuilding from broken pieces, and simply stopped. No drama, no final transformation back to human. Just an old wolf closing her eyes and accepting that all stories ended eventually. King Arion found her there, held her head in his lap while she took her last breaths, whispered the things children tell parents when language fails to capture gratitude. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for being different than expected. Thank you for teaching me that strength is not refusing to bend. It is bending and standing back up anyway. The wolf's eyes closed, her breathing stopped. And Selene Solaren Thorn, Queen of Vareth, White Sovereign, Mother, Mate, survivor of being buried alive twice, finally rested. They buried her beneath the tree in the royal gardens, not in the catacombs with previous rulers, in the place where she had chosen to rebuild instead of rot. Her marker was simple. Here lies the White Queen. She was not defeated by being buried. She was not broken by being forgotten. She survived by becoming unrecognizable and refusing to apologize for it. May we all be so fierce when the world demands we disappear. King Arion ruled for 40 more years. He never forgot the lessons learned from a mother who existed in a form nobody expected. That authority required empathy as much as strength. That survival sometimes meant accepting brutal compromises. That love was not the feeling preserved in perfect moments, but the choice to stay when everything went wrong. Vareth prospered under 3 more generations of rule. The empire that had nearly destroyed itself through political betrayal rebuilt around the understanding that power without restraint always collapsed eventually. They told stories about the White Queen who saved the kingdom by becoming something other than human. Children asked if the stories were true. Parents answered the only way possible. True enough, because facts mattered less than the lesson embedded in them. That survival was not about remaining unchanged. It was about adapting until you found a form that let you keep breathing. And sometimes the strongest thing a person could do was stop trying to return to what they were and start building from what they became. That was the crown's final lesson. Not gold, not ceremony, not dominance. Just the quiet certainty that when everything else burned away, when titles meant nothing and form became irrelevant, one choice remained. Keep living, keep adapting, keep choosing the people who chose you back. Everything else was just decoration on a story that repeated across every empire in slightly different forms. Power rose. Power fell. But the people who survived taught the same lesson. Bend before you break. Adapt before you die. And when the world demands you disappear, become something it cannot bury. That was how legends were made. Not through perfect victories. Through imperfect survival that refused to quit. And in the gardens of Vareth, beneath snow that fell like mercy, the White Wolf's grave stood as reminder that queens came in forms nobody expected, that love survived transformations that should have killed it, that the most dangerous people in any empire were not the ones who refused to bend. They were the ones who bent, survived, and came back angrier than before. The end. But also the beginning. Because every story about survival planted seeds for the next person who needed to hear that being buried alive was not the ending. It was just the dark part before clawing back to light, and light always returned. Eventually. If you refuse to stop breathing in the darkness,